I never imagined that our anniversary photo, taken at sunset on that cruise, would be the last picture of us together. That night, Mark vanished somewhere between dinner and the deck. The search turned up nothing, and I lived 2 decades in silence. But last month, an old lighthouse restoration team sent me a box of his belongings. Inside was his journal, and his handwriting wasn't the same. I'm Lisa Hartman. I'm 57 now, the kind of woman who saves old birthday cards in a shoebox and can name a song after hearing 3 notes. For 21 years, that sunset photo lived on my mantel next to a seashell we bought in the gift shop before dinner. Him in a faded polo, me in a floral dress, our cheeks in that soft light only the ocean can make. He had a wide, dependable smile. People always said Mark looked like the kind of man who could fix anything with his hands, and they were right. He fixed the leaking sink the week before we left for the cruise, swearing at the wrench and then laughing when it finally turned. We chose that cruise because it was supposed to be easy. No schedules to argue about, no decisions to make. We were 10 years married in 2003, and we thought we deserved a little lazy happiness. We sailed out of Boston, up along the Maine coast. We ate too much, slept late, and held hands like teenagers while the ship's wake unrolled behind us. Then one night after dinner, he went to get some air and never came back. The rest of that story is a blur I've told too many times. Security alarms, crew members with flashlights, Coast Guard cutters slicing through black water. I answered questions until my voice went hoarse. Did he drink much? Did he argue with anyone? Did he ever talk about wanting to disappear? The official report used phrases like presumed overboard and no confirmed sighting. It did not include the way I screamed his name into the wind until it tasted like iron in my mouth. Years became layers. I learned to show up for work, pay bills, pretend the silence in the bedroom didn't hurt. I started attending a church where the pastor didn't ask me to move on, just to breathe. Friends drifted in and out, their kindness worn thin by the helplessness of it all. I never remarried. People were gentle about that, but they wondered. I wondered too. Then, this February, a man named Owen Burke called from a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Hartman," he said, with a Tidewater accent, "I'm reaching out from the Penobscot Light Preservation. We're restoring a decommissioned lighthouse known locally as Whitecap Light. During cleanup, we discovered a sealed metal box concealed in an old examination chair. The contents include a journal and a few personal items. One is inscribed with the initials M.H. and the year 2003. I sat down so hard our old dining chair creaked. "M.H.," I repeated. "Mark Hartman." Owen paused, respectful. "Yes, ma'am. We think, well, rather than tell you, we'd like to send you the box if you're willing. There's also a letter from our director, Marjorie Peck, explaining where we found it." The box arrived 3 days later, pitted steel, the seams dark with age, a clacking padlock already snipped by the team. Inside lay a folded windbreaker, stiff with salt. A wedding ring of cheap gold I didn't recognize, not mine. A key on a nylon cord, and a journal wrapped in one layer of waxed cloth. The first page was Mark's. His genuinely crooked capital L's gave him away. "If you're reading this, Liz," he wrote, "I made it to shore." My heart ran ahead of me, tripping over the facts like a child. He made it to shore. He was alive, at least for a while. I flipped the pages carefully, the paper gone feathery at the edges. He described a dark fall, cold water swallowing him whole, his elbows hitting metal and wood as he clawed over the lifeboat rail. He wrote about the stars turning in slow circles above him and something, maybe a life ring, bumping his shoulder until he caught it. Then, toward dawn, I felt rocks under my feet. There was a black shape, the lighthouse. The next entries were short, jagged. He was dizzy. He had a cut on his scalp that wouldn't stop bleeding. He'd found a blanket, a musty couch, dried beans in a tin. He kept hearing something he called voices in the light, a mechanical hum that rose and fell, almost like words. "It's silly, Liz," he wrote, "but sometimes they sound like your name." I read deeper into the nights, my lamp painting a circle on the table. The handwriting began to slant oddly, as if he were writing with his non-dominant hand, or in the dark. He scratched down dates, though I didn't trust them. Concussions make clocks into liars. Then abruptly, the handwriting changed. It grew heavier, the letters squared off. That last entry wasn't from Mark. "Mark," it read, "you kept asking for your wife. I told you I'd go get help. I left water. I swear I left water. The weather turned bad, and there were things about me I couldn't risk getting discovered. I'm sorry. I'm going now." No signature, just those words, and the date, June 2nd, 2003. I put the journal down slowly. I knew this sensation, like standing up too fast. The edges of the room wavered. The old clock in the hall ticked like a metal heart. My fist closed around the small key from the box until its teeth bit into my skin. Mark made it. Someone found him, and then left him. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I wrote a list on the back of an old envelope, the same way Mark used to do when we planned vacations. Questions in a column, possible answers beside them. Who wrote the last entry? Why hide the journal? What lighthouse? Where exactly? And at the bottom, a practical sentence that felt like treason. "Go there, Lisa." I flew to Maine the following week. On the plane, I looked out over clouds, white as old sheets, and thought how strange it was that somewhere below me lived the last piece of the story I'd built my life around. Owen met me at a small dock in Rockland. He was in his 40s, kind eyes, the sort of man who learned your coffee order after 2 mornings. "Ms. Hartman," he said, hands tucked into his jacket pockets against the wind. "I'm so sorry for the circumstances, but I'm glad you came." He walked me along the wharf to a modest preservation office that smelled like rope and fresh paint. On the wall hung framed photos of lighthouses before and after restoration, lean white towers against slate skies, their original keepers staring out from black and white history. Marjorie Peck came out to greet me, a woman about my age with gray hair pulled through the back of a baseball cap. She shook my hand and held it an extra beat. "I lost my husband in a storm," she said quietly. "Different circumstances, but I recognize that look." In her office, she spread out a laminated chart. Whitecap lights a decommissioned caisson lighthouse set on a rocky islet about 8 miles off Owl's Head, she explained, tapping the map. Built in 1889, automated in the 70s, then turned off entirely 20 years ago when the shipping lanes changed. Locals call it Whitecap because of how the waves break around it on an outgoing tide. That old chair we found? It's a relic from when the light had a resident keeper. There used to be a tiny clinic room upstairs for emergencies. The chair is half dental, half examination. Creepy, I know. "How did you find the box?" I asked. Owen smiled a little. "By complaining. I'd been griping about the chair taking up space. When we tried to lift it, one footplate came off. We realized the base had a hollow, a stash spot. The box was inside, wedged in with old papers. We brought it back here, cut the lock, and called you." I showed them the last journal page. Owen read it, jaw tightening. I grew up around here, he said. This style of writing, my grandfather wrote exactly like this. Guys printed their letters, not cursive. Did anyone else have access to the lighthouse after it was decommissioned? I asked. Lobstermen used the lee of the island to wait out squalls, Marjorie said, and kids go out there on dares, which I hate, but we don't know about the year in question. She glanced at me. We can take you out if you're up for it. We went the next morning. The sky pressed low and stubborn, the water choppy enough that I had to grip the rail and remind myself to breathe in through my nose, out through my mouth. As we approached, Whitecap Light rose out of the waves like something built by a stubborn man, too narrow and tall to make sense. Its metal skin was flaking, the paint scaled off in many places to show raw iron. The keeper's door at the base, once white, had turned the color of old toast. We clambered onto the landing with help from 2 volunteers, Diana Mulligan and Ethan Park. Inside, the air smelled like wet rust and gulls. My hand traced the cool wall automatically, reading it the way you read a face after many years. Up a tight spiral, we climbed into the round room where the chair sat. Diana had swept the floor and stacked a few battered boxes to the side. The chair looked worse in person. Leather cracked like a battlefield, cushions caved in, headrest at a permanent, unnerving angle. This is where we found the box, Owen said, kneeling to show me the false footplate. He lifted it, and there it was, a dark compartment no bigger than a bread pan. I lowered my hand into it and felt cold emptiness. I touched the armrest absent-mindedly, and my fingers found something, tiny scratches, shallow, like cautious writing. I bent close. The letters were clumsy but clear. L+M. Not fancy, just a simple teenage carving, the kind you make when you are sure time will never erase it. I didn't mean to, but I pressed my forehead to the chair's arm and let the sob break loose. Diana rubbed my back and said, "You take your time." No one hurried me. The room was very quiet, except for the ocean, licking the foundation, and the shudder of distant waves. When I could breathe again, Owen offered, "We've got the light room upstairs. There's a bench where you can sit. Want to read more of the journal together? Sometimes having other eyes helps." We went up another flight to the lantern room. The glass panels were cloudy, the great lens long since removed. We sat on a narrow bench facing the water while gulls perched on the railing like judgmental old neighbors. I opened the journal to the beginning and started reading out loud. The first entries stayed practical: the fall, the wash of cold, the shock of the rocks. "Woke inside round room," he wrote. "Smelled like medicine and mice. Found blanket. Tried to stand. Threw up. Cut on head won't stop. I keep hearing humming like voices. The light is empty, though." He switched between hope and despair, as people do when they're wounded. Tied my shirt to the railing outside. Maybe someone will see it. Then later, storm blew through. Couldn't try the water. My head hurts. If I sleep, maybe I'll wake up and be laughing with you about this. On the 4th day, heard a motor, yelled. The voices in the light sounded like my name again. Then the writing dipped, as if he were tiring out. I don't know how long it's been. My watch stopped. I dream about you bringing coffee to me on the back deck. You were wearing the blue sweater. After that, the block print took over. The voice on the page changed. "Mark, you talked like you were half in another world. You said a woman named Lisa kept cooking eggs wrong and laughing about it. I left you a jug of water and fisherman's crackers. I said I'd come back, But I can't call anyone without trouble. I've got traps without tags. I'll come in the morning, I swear." Diana sighed softly. "So someone found him," she said, "but they were scared." "Scared of what?" I asked. "Illegal traps mean fines, sometimes prison," Owen said. "Back then, enforcement was rough. Guys did things they weren't proud of to keep boats afloat." A practical engine revved in my head, the part of me that balanced checkbooks and looked things up in public records. "Could we find anyone who used this island around that time?" I asked. "Lobstermen, retired Coast Guard, anyone." Marjorie scratched a note. "There's a retired coastie down the road, Roger Ellison. He served on rescue runs in the early 2000s, knows every rock by name. We'll go this afternoon." Roger lived in a small house with a sharp front step and a flag out front. He opened the door wearing an old sweatshirt that said "Cutters Forever" and waved us in like we were late to supper. When I explained, he took off his glasses and pressed his fingers to his brow as if thinking might be painful. "I remember the call in 03, he said. "Cruise ship reported a missing passenger. We ran a search grid through the night along the main channels. There was a squall line that made the outlying rocks dangerous. Whitecap Light was on our map, but to be frank, Ms. Hartman, that caisson's a mean place in weather. It swirls the water like a blender. We looked as close as we felt we safely could." He lowered his hands. "I hate saying that to you. I've had 20 years to second-guess it." "You did what you could," I said automatically, surprised to hear how honest I sounded. I wasn't there to assign blame. I was there to learn. "Do you know anyone who might have used the island around that time? Someone with reasons not to talk to the Coast Guard?" He glanced at Owen. "Names come with stories," Roger said slowly. "There was Caleb Brower, a hard-luck lobsterman, lost his permit for a season, tag violations, rumors of poaching, lived rough, drank some, but not mean. He used to tie up on the lee of Whitecap when the weather flipped. Died in 2009. Heart attack." "Family?" I asked. "Sister over toward Tennant's Harbor," Roger said. "Naomi Brower, church-going type, teaches Sunday school. If Caleb ran into your husband, she may know something." On the way back to town, Owen kept the truck radio low. "We don't have to talk to her today," he said. "We can go back to the hotel, let you rest." "I won't sleep anyway," I said. "Let's go." Naomi's house sat above a field of tall grass, waving like sea under wind. She met us on the porch, with her hands folded in her apron, eyes sharp and kind at the same time, like a woman who had built her life out of small, careful choices. When we explained who I was, she turned pale and steadied herself against the doorframe. "I know why you're here," she said, and gestured us in. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and strong coffee. "My brother was not a perfect man," she began, taking a seat at the table. "But he wasn't cruel. He had traps with no tags, yes. He argued with the law. He never laid a hand on his wife. That was part of the trouble, losing her to someone else. It knocked him sideways. I say that not as an excuse, but to show you his heart." Naomi stood and walked to an old pie safe in the corner. From a drawer, she pulled a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth. She laid it on the table and unrolled it gently. Inside was a brass belt buckle stamped with a lighthouse and a coil of nylon cord tied in a sloppy knot, and a folded page. "I found these after he died," she said. "He'd written things and tucked them away. I thought maybe, but I didn't know how to find you." I unfolded the page with careful fingers. The handwriting matched the last entry in the journal, heavy, printed, the letters leaning forward like they wanted to run. "For the man at the light," it said. I went back with help. The storm was a bad one. The Coast Guard cutter moved past the far side. I tried to flag them, but I worried what they'd see in my boat. By the time I got across to the ladder in the morning, he was gone quiet. I shut his eyes because no one should be left like that. I didn't tell anyone because I didn't want to go to jail and lose the boat. I took his ring off thinking maybe I could find his wife later and tell her. I didn't. I'm sorry to God and whoever reads this. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding and laid the paper flat to keep my hands from shaking. Naomi watched my face. "I told him before he died that secrets have weight," she said softly. "He said he knew, and that it was a weight a man carried until he broke. I believe he sealed the journal to keep it safe. Maybe he thought he'd bring it to you someday." The brass buckle glittered in the afternoon light. "The ring," I said weakly. "That was Mark's?" Naomi nodded. "Caleb said the man kept pulling at the ring and whispering a woman's name. He feared it would slip away into the water, so he tied it to the nylon cord with a key. To keep it together, he said. He was strange about keychains." My throat dried. I pictured Mark on that chair, fingers fumbling, the nylon cord tangled against his skin. I pictured Caleb, real and flawed, alone in a storm, making the worst kind of choice. It wasn't a mystery novel. It was life, full of people doing the best they could with the courage they had at the time. That evening back at the hotel, I spread the journal, Caleb's letter, and the small objects on the bedspread. I arranged them like pieces of a mosaic until a shape started to emerge. The shape was difficult, but it was honest. Mark fell. He survived long enough to write, to carve our initials, to hope. A lobsterman found him and left to fetch help, but fear got in the way. Then the weather closed around the island like a fist. By morning, it was too late. There were still things I didn't know. How long Mark lived after Caleb left, whether the voices he heard were real or a concussion's trick. Why Caleb sealed the box inside that chair rather than bury it or throw it into the sea. But I no longer felt like I was chasing a ghost that ran faster the closer I came. I felt like I was walking toward a man I loved, as he was. "Do you want to go back out tomorrow?" Owen asked when he called to check on me. "Yes," I said. "I want to say goodbye where he said hello again." Before dawn, we boarded the boat. The sky showed a thin strip of gold that made the water look like a quilt stitched from cold light. I gripped my thermos and felt the steady thrum of the engine in the soles of my feet. At Whitecap, the volunteers helped me ashore. I carried a small pack, a handful of Mark's ashes we'd saved, because back then I'd had nothing else to do with them, a folded letter I'd written to him, and an old harmonica he used to play on summer nights. My fingers knew where to go in the lighthouse without thinking, the stair treads, the places to duck your head, the worn strip in the floor beside the chair. I sat there for a while, reading his words again. The ocean outside chewed lightly at the footings, patient as an animal that knows you'll leave eventually. Then I took out the letter I'd written, simple words, because simplicity was all my heart had left. "Mark," I wrote, "they found your words. I heard your voice in them. I forgive the fear that kept help away. I forgive the storm. I forgive what I can, and I leave the rest to God. I want you to know that the life I built afterward wasn't a betrayal. I carried you with me. I planted tomatoes. I went to movies alone and laughed out loud. I kept your sweatshirt in the closet because it smelled like detergent and cedar, and sometimes I needed that smell to sleep. I love you. I still do." When I finished, I folded the letter and slid it under the chair's headrest, where there was a sliver of space. It felt right to leave words with words. Then I carried the small tin of ashes up to the lantern room. Owen and Diana stood back, letting me be whatever I needed to be. I opened the tin and let the wind take what was left of him in a soft gray arc. It turned and drifted, and then wasn't there anymore, become part of air and fog and sea and salt. Downstairs again, I felt an odd impulse. I got on my knees beside the chair and slipped my finger under the armrest where the L+M carving sat. The edges were rough as uncut rice. On my own, I took out my keys and used the end to add another mark. Not neat. L 2024. Not to claim the place, only to say, I was here too. Back at the dock, Naomi met us with a tin of biscuits wrapped in a towel. She didn't say much, just squeezed my hands. Caleb carried that weight, she murmured. I hope you don't feel you have to carry more than your share now. I don't, I said, and it was true, because the last weight, the not knowing, had shifted, not disappeared, but shifted so I could stand up straight again. People expect a neat ending, and life rarely gives one. But I'll tell you what the truth gave me. It gave me the ability to sleep through the night without waking at imaginary footsteps on the porch. It gave me back the song Mark used to play on that harmonica. I found myself humming it while washing dishes, and I didn't flinch. The truth did not fix the empty side of the bed, but it kept me from staring at the ocean as if it owed me an answer. The week after I returned home, I sat down with the journal and wrote an outline of what I believed had happened. I used the style Mark liked, bulleted lists, dates, clean lines, because I wanted to honor the part of him that loved a tidy plan, even if life refused to follow it. May 2003, Mark and I board the cruise out of Boston, planning to toast our 10th anniversary and eat too much pie. Night of May 31st. After dinner, he steps out onto the deck. Maybe a patch of water looks lit from below by moonlight, phosphorescence, which he always loved. He leans, loses balance, falls. No one sees him fall. People always ask how that could happen, and I tell them ships are cities. Cities hold more darkness than we like to admit. Early hours, June 1st. In cold water, Mark finds a life ring or floating debris, rides it toward a dark shape. Whitecap light. June warns 2. He shelters in the old exam room. He's concussed. He writes. He keeps hearing the building's old metalwork make sound, wind turning rivets into whisperers, voices in the light. He carves our initials because that's what you do when you're fighting to exist. June 2nd. Caleb Brower, lobsterman, takes shelter on the island. He finds Mark, leaves water and crackers, promises to return with help. He doesn't radio the Coast Guard because a boat search might reveal his illegal gear. A squall breaks across the ledge, and by the time he returns, Mark is gone. Caleb closes his eyes and takes the ring and a key to protect them, intending to find me someday in penance. He writes a few lines in the journal and seals it in the chair's hidden compartment because he believes that if someone does come looking, the story won't wash away. 2009. Caleb dies suddenly. His sister finds the letter among his things, but doesn't know how to get it to the right person. 2024. Restoration begins. The chair yields its secret. The story surfaces. That looked like a story to me. Not perfect, but complete enough to live with. I decided to do one more thing. I called a friend at our local paper, Jason Reed, who had lost a daughter years before and therefore understood how to be careful with other people's pain. I'm not looking for a headline, I told him. I'm looking for a small obituary, the kind you give someone whose life was ordinary a long time and then became a footnote. He asked for the basics and the truth and promised to keep it gentle. The piece ran on a Wednesday. Rockland Preservation Project brings closure in 2003 disappearance. It said Mark had been a husband and a friend who liked boats and thrift store radios and thought any day that ended with pie was a good day. It also mentioned the Whitecap Light Crew by name, and Naomi, a sister who carried her own share of the weight. That Sunday, I went back to church for the first time in months. The pastor's sermon was about the prodigal son, which I had always thought was a story about boys and fathers. But that morning, I heard something else. The part about the father seeing his son from far off and running to meet him. I thought about the long way a man can come home, by words, by a ring on a cord, by a line scratched into a chair. I cried and let people wrap their arms around me because that's what people my age have learned to do. We hold each other up when we don't know what else to do. Later, Marjorie called to ask permission for a small plaque at the lighthouse. "We'll pay for it, of course," she said. "Just a line or two, something that says people matter more than storms." I told her I liked that. The plaque now reads, "In memory of Mark Hartman, who reached this light in hope. May all who are lost find words to lead them home." They placed it at knee height by the chair, where you have to stoop to read it, the position of a person about to listen, not lecture. I went back one more time that summer, alone, when the blueberries were ripe on the mainland and the tourists had not yet lined the sidewalks. On the boat out, Naomi tucked a paper sack in my hands without comment. Inside were hand pies, still warm. At Whitecap, the wind was soft, the water holding that deep denim color that always made Mark point and say, "Look at that. That's how blue was invented." I took out Mark's old harmonica and played the notes I remembered. They weren't pretty, but they were real. I sat in the exam room, and it no longer felt like the place where hope died. It felt like the place where truth waited patiently under rust and dust until someone was brave enough to open a small door. I've learned something I wish I'd known 20 years ago. Sometimes we don't need an answer that makes sense to everyone. We just need enough truth to live by. The journal didn't tell me everything, but it told me Mark tried. He fought the water. He found a light. He carved our initials as if to say, "We were here. We loved. Remember that." And a flawed man found him and failed him and tried, in his clumsy way, to send him back to me with a ring and a few sentences. That doesn't excuse anything, but it adds color to a story that had been black and white. On my drive home from Maine, I took the long way, following Route 1 as it coiled along the shore. I stopped at a small turnout where the pines leaned over the water and left their needles in a deep brown carpet. I got out and stood there until the smell of salt and sap filled my hair. A gull circled once and moved on. No drama, no sign, just the slow breathing of the world. When I reached my house, I set the sunset photo back on the mantel and placed the journal beside it. I didn't close it, the way I used to close books to keep from seeing what came next. I left it open to that page where Mark wrote about hearing my name in the humming. Maybe he did. Maybe he just wanted to. Either way, I'm grateful. That night, for the first time in years, I lit a single candle in the kitchen. The house felt smaller, but not empty. I ate a hand pie Naomi had sent and laughed when the filling dripped down my wrist, because Mark used to say I ate pastries like a kid on a carnival ride. I washed the plate and put it away. I turned off the light and let the candle flicker out on its own, a small light that did what it could until the room no longer needed it. I want to end by asking you something, not to be nosy, but because questions have been the rails that kept me moving forward. If you were in my shoes, would you have wanted to know? Would you have taken a box from strangers and opened it on your kitchen table, knowing the truth inside might break you again before it made you whole? Subscribe if you believe every truth eventually surfaces, even if it has to wait inside a rusted chair for 21 years.